Hi, I'm Heather King, and I just wanted to share a couple of things that have come to me this week. One of them is the silence of God. I agonize, as probably many of us do, over when, if ever, it's kind of appropriate to quote speak out, and when silence is better. And I've been thinking about how God never says anything, doesn't take a stand, doesn't reproach us, doesn't caution us. Oh, don't do that. That's going to cause a ton of trouble. Doesn't guilt trip us, doesn't correct the egregious kind of misapprehensions and misinterpretations of that are promulgated about him and his beloved son. Doesn't say anything ever. And yet, in that silence, the human heart somehow knows that goodness reigns in the end, love reigns. It's very uh, I mean, it's not to say it's never appropriate to speak out or to sort of make known our take on things or our opinion, but I think I say this for myself, for the most part, probably silence coupled with, of course, a life ordered to prayer and the effort to love one another as he loved us, to love God with our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole mind. Um, Coupled with that as the backbone of our life is probably the best way. And I say this partly because I was really brought up short yesterday in particular by the realization, not that I haven't had it before, but how quickly my own heart becomes hardened and how I'm the last one to know. Um, I think we live in a culture that is so permeated with ideologies of various kinds, and it's very easy to hate the ideology and then forget the suffering person that's at the center of around which the ideology has formed. And so the sort of profound dislike of the ideology, it doesn't become a dislike for the victim of oppression, but it for me becomes I I see a mass of humanity of a particular group rather than the individual, and that's a very dangerous way to go through the world. I'll give you a couple of examples. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she is uh, has studied and is trying to become a therapist. She's getting the hours, as you know, probably you have to log a ton of hours of kind of practice or work before you can get your license. And so she's in a very difficult work situation. Most of them are a lot younger than her, and well, that's all I'll say. Most of them are a lot younger, and she's a deep person of Christ and is trying to navigate her way through. And I said something like, "Well, if you want to get those hours," and she knows that the she wants to get her license because she wants to. She's a deeply compassionate heart and wants to help people. And I said, if you want to get that license, you kind of have to say more or less, I, to your boss, like, you call the shots, and I'm happy to do whatever you think is best. I mean, provided it doesn't completely uh, go against your conscience. And my friend said, and we're talking about offering it up, and my friend said, one good thing is, um, as she was kind of having to repress her true feelings and really keep her emotions in check, as you do when you're an employee. And she said, I thought of how she used to be uh, married to a black guy. But anyway, for whatever that's worth. But she said, I thought of how that's what black people have had to endure for so long. I mean, we're way worse than that, of course, during slavery, but that's how a black person or a minority must feel when they have to, in order to keep the job or support the family, um, keep everything under wraps. Yes, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And we both were, I mean, how the toll that that takes on a human spirit and soul. And it brought the ideology that goes on around race and identity, it just brought it back to the completely apart from politics and even civil rights, like the human beneath all that, that is bleeding, that has a story, that has a soul, that has a sense of humor, that has strengths, that has weaknesses. So that was good, just to sort of, um, yeah, and even apart from ideology, when you're dealing with human relations, it's easy to blame on the other person, to attach, oh, they're acting this way because they're under the sway of some ideology or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, but so am I. If I'm I am totally too. If I'm fighting the ideology, or I've reduced that person whose behavior I dislike to I'm not seeing them as a human being either. I see them as a sort of victim of ideology, and therefore really not to have a whole lot of compassion for. And so all that just really made me sit and ponder. And then shortly after that, I talked to another dear friend of mine who's a doctor and who is also uh, deeply Catholic, and like many of us, just appalled at the kind of extremist gender ideology and the trans, just the mysterious, 6,000% increase or whatever it is among young teenage girls, and all of that, and the without the long-term studies, performing irreversible surgeries and uh, chemicals and so forth. He feels horrible as a doctor. But he also pointed out kind of the same thing, that yeah, but and underneath, and we hate the ideology, but underneath that is a suffering human being with a story, who's dying like all of us, to belong, to have a place in the world, to feel situated, to have purpose and meaning. Uh, and again, he said we must think of these issues not in terms of ideology, but of the human being, the person, the individual person, who's being affected by them. Because otherwise, again, I'm just part of the problem if I'm just railing against the ideologues. I've become, an anti-ideologue. So it's really it just really took me aback and led to a deep examination of conscience, and about how I myself need to be very careful of my thoughts, first of all, because the words, written or oral, of course, are generated by the thoughts. I need to be careful about my words and my tone. And so I just want to read a couple to that end. I want to read a couple of my doctor friend told me I should write to Father Donald Haggerty, because I told him about my my favorite Father Haggerty book, Conversion. I said, "Oh, you have to get it," and I told him I'd written a column about him. I've spoken about him. He's a priest at St. Patrick's in New York, and has written a bunch of books and writes about contemplative prayer. And he said, "Oh, you have to write to him. No, you have to write to him. Thank him. Send him your column." So I just said, "Okay, if you tell me I need to write to him, I need to write to him." This guy's a deacon too, so I'm sending off a little letter today to Father Haggerty. He doesn't have to write back, of course. He's a busy man, but it's really a thank you letter. But anyway, this is from his book, Contemplative Provocations. Uh, Father Donald Haggerty just says, I just want to read a couple of paragraphs that goes to what I'm talking about. He says, among the homeless poor whose lives mingle with the litter of the streets, a nuisance to many in their grime and smell and soliciting eye, not all are deranged and lunatic. Surely some are true souls of despair who have embraced a life of forsakenness to enclose in silence within themselves a mistake now long past. And if these latter have a stifled passion we do not suspect, and a recurring thought that another life was possible with a different choice, in some cases the occupied faces hurrying past them may share more kinship than they realize with their own crossroad when they could have chosen differently. And then he says, another paragraph, the poor you have always with you, verses John 12:8. And yet it is rather easy to look at the derelict poor and consider self-inflicted the scars from alcohol and drugs that mar their faces, easy to harbor disdain for their indecency. But then surely we sometimes miss a lonely man's eyes looking up in a wish that his face will not provoke this time a glance of revulsion. And perhaps the same look of those eyes was also in the eyes of Jesus as he carried the cross to Calvary. Um, so this idea of the suffering human person, and I will say also, I was back in LA for about almost 2 weeks, and I I may have mentioned I went to mass, a Sunday 5 p.m. mass at the Church of the Blessed Sacrament in on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. Hollywood has a huge homeless population at the moment, and the mass and the church does a lot for the poor. It's kind of besieged, though it's in this kind of battle zone at the moment. But I walked into the sanctuary, and there was this kind of like marimba, electrified marimba type band choir. Um, they were just belting it out. They were really kind of wonderful. But the point is, there were inside the sanctuary was almost. I mean, I wouldn't say it was almost full, but it was probably maybe 2/3 full. You know, no one goes to mass by accident on a Sunday afternoon at 5, and it was the whole spectrum of humanity, man. There were people who looked like they didn't have shelter for the night. There were a ton of couples who looked like they were probably gay. There were a ton of people who looked like they were probably trans. There were just there were families. It was the whole spectrum of humanity. But again, my heart just bled, for these are the people that, including me, and I'm one of them. I get to be one of them, um, one of humanity. That listened to Christ's Sermon on the Mount, like thirsting for a drop of living water, who are just desperate to get close to Christ and to God and to contribute and to be good. So anyway, my heart is constantly, this is kind of the human heart, right? It gets opened and it softens, and then uh the minute I feel on solid ground, my ego kicks in, and I suddenly start uh thinking I know anything, and I don't. And You know, let us always be in the back of the church saying, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner, um, and turn my heart from stone to flesh. So that's it. I haven't been reading much because I'm in this travel vortex. I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. to help give a retreat on to the Catholic artist on June 21st and 22nd. And I'm going to go a week early and just basically visit a couple of friends, but also, or visit with a couple of friends and take in the Enid Haupt Garden, which is unbelievably great, and the museums and stuff. So, and there's another talk I'm giving in Chesapeake, Virginia afterward, and so the flights and the cabs and the hotel and on and on. And then the, the Ireland trip where I'm going to give a week-long memoir writing retreat at Kylemore Abbey in Connemara, Ireland, west coast of Ireland. Then I'm going to go to County Donegal and hopefully go to a silent retreat at Ard's Franciscan Friary. Then I'm going back to Dublin. I'm going to fly to Venice and see the Venice Biennale and whatever else. I mean, you know, Venice is its whole kind of research project. And then there's, yes, there's lots of travel in there. Ireland is basically buses, and then I'll fly back to Dublin, and from there fly home. So I've been doing a lot of that, just planning and researching, and what an incredible blessing to be able to just contemplate traveling and seeing new places and people. And you know, part of me would just way rather stay home in my comfy little home with my books, but the world calls or something. um, okay, have a wonderful week. Thank you so much. And check out my blog of books, heather-king.com. All kinds of stuff on there. Okay.